to come in here. We had some folks just share that the chairs over there were not as comfortable as they might be. Now, having said that, don't get too comfortable. We'll probably go and turn the heat off eventually, and just in case. But hey, thank you for coming back and joining us, especially on such a rotten day in terms of being outside and leaving your house and your warmth and all of that. But I sure appreciate you coming and joining us for day 2. The schedule this morning is we'll go probably just a little bit over an hour this morning. We'll take a break. And in true Presbyterian form, I was just chatting about this with Gary Goff, a true Presbyterian conference, you have to stop about every hour for food, just because. And so we'll take a break, again, just a little bit beyond an hour, and there'll be some snacks in the lobby area for you. And then we'll come back and we'll do our wrap-up. And then lunch will be served up in Garrett Hall, and so that'll all be set out for us. It'll be waiting for us around noon or a little bit before this afternoon, and then and we will end up there. So once you have lunch, you're good to go. And with our thanks for coming and being a part of this conference. So let me open us in prayer, and then we'll bring Tim on. Father, we thank you once again for your sovereignty. Thank you for your will, and thank you for the opportunity to be together once again today to talk about relationships. We thank you that you show us what our true value is in reaching out to us and being the one that moved toward us first. And because of that, we're confident of our relationship with you. And so we pray that you'd open our hearts and our minds to what Tim has for us this morning. Speak to us, and just be present during this time, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Timothy, it is all yours.
All right. Hey, good morning. Good to see you again. Glad you're all back. By that sounded ridiculous. Just go ahead. You can stop me, and I'll take a stab at answering it. Like I said, I don't always have snappy answers to questions in the moment, but I'll do my very best. So anyway, thank you for being here. So today, session 2. But let's take a look. First of all, remember what we ended up talking about last night? Anybody remember? Okay. Yeah, dreams, exactly. We're talking about dreams in relationships. So a lot of the Gottman research, when it got, when they were doing it over the course of, it's a latitudinal or longitudinal study, they began to realize over the course of time that people oftentimes are in a relationship because they had this dream in life for what they wanted out of life. And so we tend to get into relationships hoping that we can achieve our dreams. Oftentimes it's not just about the career we're in. Oftentimes it's a people we choose to hang out with. And so anyway, these 3 questions came in about dreams. The first question was, can your dreams change? Absolutely they can. In fact, we got home last night and back to George and Elizabeth's place, and Terry said, she said, hey, good job. She said, but I think my dream is changing, and which is fine. That's good. But that's how you update love maps, by talking about how your dreams are changing. Now that our kids are grown and gone, Terry's dream for a long time was to have a lot of rich family time, and we don't have a ton of that. We have rich family time when we are together, but it's, a couple times a year now when we're all together at the most. And she said, one of my dreams right now is I just want to be able to have some adventures and see some places. And so, yes, dreams change. And as your dream changes, I think it's really important to keep updating your dreams with the people you're in relationship with, whether it's your spouse or if it's, a best friend, your friend group. I just think it's really important to update those because they do change and they grow, they morph, you know what I mean? Because we go through different stages in life. I'm going to be talking about that later this morning in the second, I think it's in the second segment, about how as we age, we go through developmental stages. And as those stages, as we mature, I think our dreams mature too, and they change a little bit. So that's totally appropriate. Does the individual, him or herself, have the ability to change their dreams? Of course, yeah. I mean, it's our desires and it's our aspirations and our passions. That's what drives a dream. And so, yeah, we oftentimes do change them because, our interests change and where we live changes and who we know changes. And the last question that came in was, how do you differentiate between dreams and the fulfillment of what God's wanting to do in your life? That is a great question. And I think it has a lot to do with, I think whether a person is a believer or not, whether a person is a Christian or has any sort of religious interest, you still have dreams in life. But for those of us who are followers of Christ and who have begun to move through So there we go. I'm back. And as we go, as we mature as believers, I do think that we begin to discover things like what are our spiritual gifts. That's one of the things that I think oftentimes kind of puts some meat on the bones of what our dreams are. We try different things, and our passions begin to evolve, and so on and so forth. If you'd have told me, 30 years ago, even 25 years ago, that I was going to routinely go on missions trips, I would have said, that's just not really my thing. But somebody on our staff at our church said, hey, we'd like you to go, interface with a couple of missionaries that we have in France. And I said, I could probably do France, So we went, and boy, I'll tell you, that was the beginning of just a great, series of years of working, helping resource churches, small churches in Europe, not just in France, but also in Romania. So yeah, I think our dreams do change, and I think that God does different things with our lives, and that oftentimes alters or shapes how we dream and what we dream. So yeah. Any other questions about that? Yes.
If that changes, then that might change your relationship.
Yeah, she said if that changes, that might change your relationship with the person you're with, whether it's a spouse or friends or whatever. Yes, absolutely. And that's where, that's why it's so important to always be updating and be talking about dreams. And that's why, for example, as a married couple, I think it's important to be talking about what are the things in our life together, that give each one of us passion. And it's important to be sensitive. One of the things that Gottman talks a lot about is emotionally intelligent marriages. Emotionally intelligent marriages are marriages where both people, or even any relationship, an emotionally intelligent relationship is one where both people not only are aware of their own lives and their own passions and their own gifts and their own desires and their own dreams, but they also become very aware of their partner's dreams and hopes and aspirations, and have empathy for them and compassion for them and interest in them. And so, yeah, it takes updating love maps and creating shared meaning, like we talked about last night. That has to be an ongoing process, or else, yeah, there can be drift in a relationship. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
So what's the difference between dreams and goals and desires? As we were talking about it after we left last night, I don't understand.
Yeah, what's the difference between dreams and goals, for example? Anybody got an answer to that one? Have you been thinking about it and it occurred to you? Yes.
For example, my husband's goal, but he said it was his dream, was to always retire on a beach in Hawaii. So now he's come to the realization, and you mentioned last night, his goal was to do that, which he isn't anymore, but his dream was lack of stress. So that goal of retiring somewhere on a beach was to fulfill his dream of having a lack of stress.
Yeah, if you sense that, that's a great answer. Go ahead, keep going. All right. So I love that, because when you talk about a goal like retiring on a beach in Hawaii, or that's been my goal for a long time too, quite frankly. it's important to go, okay, what's behind that goal? What am I looking for? It's like the woman I talked about last night who was in my office and said, my goal or my dream has always been to own a home at the ocean or at the beach. And I remember asking her, what's behind that? And for her, that's just like, I want to be out of Sacramento. I want to be away from a city. I want to just be. So as we talked, I think it was just the whole idea of just kind of being free and able to just go and do what she wanted to do. And so ultimately, she realized it doesn't have to be, she had this picture in her mind, which that's a good way for us to nurture our dreams, is we develop pictures in our minds of what it might look like if we were to be there and doing that. And oftentimes we do get a pretty specific picture that begins to emerge because we picture ourselves doing that in order to achieve that sense of freedom or adventure or whatever. Yeah, just.
I think for a lot of us, our dream is to be stress-free.
Yes.
Our goal then, I guess, would be different for.
Right. If your dream is to be stress-free, you have to kind of take a look at what you're doing in your life that causes stress. I mean, for some people, what they're doing that causes stress wouldn't be stressful for somebody else, and vice versa. So yes, I think it's figuring out kind of what is the, for me, part of my dream of freedom had to do with the fact that I realized for the past 30 some years, I just don't slow down very much. I know it's hard to tell looking at me that I might talk faster, do anything else. Type A. But I over the course of the time, I've realized, man, I get going so fast in life sometimes that I miss a lot of nuance, and I miss, I was noticing this. I like to run, and I was running out in this area by the Sacramento or by the American River, which is not far from where we live. And this is the time of year in Northern California where like the sun comes out and it's warm. And so, a run out in those areas, the sights and the sounds and the smells and it's just this amazing experience. But for a lot of years, I was going through the motions of doing, the run without noticing, without smelling the coffee or the roses or however that metaphor goes. You know what I'm saying? So one of my goals now in order to achieve freedom is to be less hurried. And that's really working as I've, worked at kind of slowing the pace of my life down a little bit. So, okay, let's jump in with some of the material for this morning. Session 2, it says, I have great news about conflict. This secret can take your relationship from languishing to flourishing. And like I mentioned last night, there are only two kinds of conflict in a relationship. There's solvable conflict and perpetual conflict. And some of you who were here last time I was here, you remembered that. And some of you have really been working on that in your relationships. So what I want to challenge you to do this morning is to see your perpetual conflicts. If you can identify what those are in the relationships you're in, see your perpetual conflicts as an opportunity instead of an opposition to deal with. All right? In order to do that, ask yourself, instead of asking yourself, what is wrong with this person I'm in a relationship with? Instead of asking yourself that question, what is wrong with him or what is wrong with her or what's their problem, ask yourself, what is the dream that I'm not hearing in this conversation we're having? And sometimes you have to kind of stop yourself early on in the disagreement you're having with the person, because if you let it go too far, you start to get like emotionally flooded, and it could be kind of a problem because all of a sudden you find yourself, at least temporarily, in negative sentiment, and you're not thinking positive thoughts about this person. But early on in a conversation, before you go too far down the road, if you can ask yourself, okay, we're having this discussion again. We've argued about this multiple times. What's the dream I'm not hearing? What that does is it reframes your conflict from something that's negative to something that could be kind of positive. that make sense? So to begin to ask yourself, what's the dream I'm not hearing here? Or what's the dream I'm not acknowledging in the other person? Okay? Number 2, getting trapped in gridlock oftentimes forces your experience of a conflict discussion through the following 5 stages. So if you do get caught up in it, this is why it's so important to stop and ask yourself what the dream is behind this disagreement, because otherwise these 5 stages can happen. Stage number 1 is that obviously your dreams stand in opposition. So you've got a dream, this person's got a dream, you're starting to have a conflict. And for you, this is whatever this conflict or this conversation is all about, is your dream is getting interrupted. Your dream is not being acknowledged. And things are starting to get tense. Instead of integrating them and supporting each other, you kind of get stuck apart. That's stage 1. Stage 2 is that you start getting entrenched in your position. Have you ever kind of sensed yourself doing that, going, okay, we're arguing about this thing again. I am not backing down this time. You ever said that to yourself? I am not backing down this time. That's that entrenchment. That's what you're not hearing what the dream is the other person's experiencing. So you're starting to get entrenched in this conflict, and you are not going to move. You're going to sit here and you're going to wait until they snap out of it and go, oh, you're right. I've been an idiot all these years. Nobody ever does that in relationships. Okay. Number 3, increased fears of accepting influence from your partner. In other words, okay, if I don't stand up for this right now, I'm going to wind up being just as messed up as he is or she is. One of the 7 principles, one of the 7 things that the Gottman Institute realized when they did the research, one of the 7 things in common that people who have satisfying relationships experience, one of those things is accepting influence. Highly satisfied couples, each person in the couple tend to accept influence from one another. But you see, when your dreams are in conflict and you are in conflict and you start to get entrenched in your position and no way you're going to back down, what happens is you stop accepting influence. You stop saying, I'm going to let a little bit of you rub off on me, and vice versa. Because you kind of, you're entrenched, you're separated, you're pulled apart in the relationship. And then step 4 is called vilification. And this is where Gottman talks about, have you ever heard this term? His term is the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, is what he calls it. And these are the 4 common negative reactions. And I'm going to be defining them in just a moment or two specifically. But you begin to act out of negative sentiment. In other words, all your conversation, your attitude, how you come across to the other person, it's all driven by the fact that you're saying to yourself, I am not going to budge. And not budging, I want to take it back. It's all about, I'm not hearing the dream here. I'm getting irritated with you because we've argued about money umpteen times. Or we've argued about the kids, or we've argued about whatever it is, umpteen times. And in your mind, in that negative moment, you've made it all about the money. And it's really not about the money, it's about the dream. Money might be something that you fear is going to interrupt the dream. It doesn't have to be money, it could be time, people argue about all kinds of different things, but what I'm saying is, oftentimes it's because there's a dream hidden in there. See? Okay, so all relationships have some perpetual conflict. So understanding what lies beneath it helps you end the painful negative conversations. Make sense? Okay, so what I thought I'd do is I'm going to give you a moment. I'm going to give you a couple exercises to do. And so I know we're seated in pews, which is great for viewing a speaker, but not great for having conversations with people. So what I want you to do is there's 4 people right here. You guys are going to be like a little group, okay? So kind of, you're going to have to kind of turn around, crane your neck, and have some interaction with people near you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a scenario. And it's a conflict scenario. And I want you to decide and discuss, is this conflict that I just read to you, Is it a perpetual or is it a solvable problem? Make sense? All right? And I mean, really get into it. Argue with each other, really tear it up, okay? All right, so here we go. Ready? Cliff and Lynn agree that it's Cliff's job to take out the kitchen trash every evening after dinner. But lately, he's been so distracted by this big deadline looming at work that he forgets. Either Lynn ends up throwing out the garbage herself, or the trash, it just sits there. By morning, the apartment smells like the city dump, and Lynn is in a rage. Solvable or perpetual? Take a minute and just kind of discuss that together. All right, let's find out. Who wants to go first? Let me know what you think it is. Yeah, okay, you guys right here. Okay, hold on. We're going to come right back to you guys. We're going to start easy and we're going to work up. Okay. All right, so you think it's solvable, Terry. Okay, why is it solvable?
There's a solution that can be made.
Okay, yeah, it's a solution that can be made. This is a deal where their argument is, well, let's find out what these folks think first. Yeah, before I, yeah.
Well, I don't think it's solvable.
You don't think it's solvable? Okay, why?
Because the solvable thing is she takes out the garbage.
Right. That's a solution. But so you're saying that's what? Yes. But what makes it perpetual?
Well, he's just not doing it.
Ah.
Take out the garbage. It only takes a couple minutes.
But remember the key ingredient in this particular scenario. He's got this thing going on at work, like a big deadline coming up. This is what makes it a solvable rather than perpetual one. They've had an agreement about the trash. He's not saying, hey, I've changed my mind. My dream is not to take out trash anymore. They never had that conversation. This thing is happening because, why? Because he's got this thing happening. So if they're in positive sentiment, she's going to think to herself, you know what? He's totally stressed out right now. We've had this discussion. He's going to be the trash guy, but yeah, I'm mad, but okay, now if she thinks it through and they stay in positive sentiment, it's definitely solvable because once he's over this, this project at work, things will go back to with it.
Has she got 7 kids?
Okay, let's not defend her. Okay, let's just, you guys, this is not a TV show, okay? Come on. I feel bad for her, but it's a temporary problem, okay? Let's move on to Elsie. Elsie wants to spend less time with Joel and more time with her friends. Joel says that this makes him feel abandoned. Elsie says that she needs more time away from him. He simply seems so needy to her, and she's feeling suffocated by him. Talk about that. Solvable or perpetual? Perpetual. You think it's perpetual, Carrie? Okay, tell me why. Okay, Carrie says it's perpetual. Anybody agree that this is a perpetual issue? Okay, Blake, tell us why.
This is something that will maybe get temporarily fixed, like, okay, fine, I'll sacrifice and do this or that, but it will pop up again
Why?
in the future or whatever, because there's something deeper that's not.
Yeah, see, they're fundamentally very different people. One of them has a much higher need for attachment than the other one does. And so it's not saying that they won't stay together and have a great marriage, but it's a perpetual issue. Again, when we're talking about the difference between solvable and perpetual, it doesn't mean that, oh, you've got a perpetual problem, you're probably going to end in divorce. That's not what it is at all. We all have perpetual issues in our relationships. The key is learning how to deal with perpetual versus solvable. Solve your solvable problems, and then you've got to deal with your perpetual ones. And I'll tell you about that in just a minute, how we do that in just a minute. But that's absolutely right. All right, let's take a look at one more. Penny complains that Roger expects her to do all the work of taking care of their newborn son. Roger says he'd like to do more, but because he works during the day, he isn't as experienced as his wife is at diapering and bathing and the like. This is kind of a setup, isn't it? Whenever he does try to do something like pick up the baby when he cries, Penny tells him he's doing it wrong, and this makes him angry, and he ends up telling her to just do it herself. Okay, solvable or perpetual? Take a moment and discuss that one. Let me interrupt you. Was that solvable or perpetual? Did anybody, by the way, relate with that story? Okay, yeah. So somebody said it's both. Okay, it can't be. All right, guys, make a decision. Is it solvable or perpetual? Solvable. Why is it solvable, Keith?
They both agree that they want to help each other, and they just need to go to a counselor like you and have them tell you.
Exactly. This is why we always end with this particular one. I think everybody should be in therapy at some point in their life, okay? We all need it. Yes, but that's absolutely true, because what this guy needs to do is he needs to learn how to, take care of his baby, get more, and they'll be able to share their load a little bit better. Yes.
We said that it was solvable, but it was also a perpetual problem.
And
There was clearly trust issues between them that had to be brought out and discussed.
right. Okay.
One feels criticized because there's not trust. She's a control freak. Yeah.
Good one, babe.
It's a difference in the generation too, because in our generation, Gary did not help change babies' diapers.
Gary, you didn't change diapers? Took you a while to, all day to get the diapers? I don't know what to do. I don't know. What is this thing? Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's a generation, and it's really nice to see younger fathers stepping up and putting the baby in the stroller and going around the block with them and
Can you hear in the back? Yeah, so it's really nice that, and I agree. I think the younger dads, are. Let's hear it for younger dads right now, okay? Yeah. Here on the eve of Mother's Day, let's celebrate young dads. All right? Okay. All right, so somebody said something about, or is that we were talking over here about solvable versus perpetual. So I want to just real quick. I don't even think this is on the outline, which it should have been, because how do you deal with perpetual problems? One of my favorite verses. In fact, I'm going to be preaching on this verse tomorrow morning. I'm going to be preaching on a whole passage, but the verse that's like embedded in it that I'm just so crazy about is Philippians 4:8. I just think that is such a powerful passage for anybody in a relationship. Paraphrased, Paul says, finally then, brothers and sisters, whatever is good, whatever is right, whatever is excellent, whatever is lovely, whatever is faith, well, all these positive things, whatever is amazing. Paul says what? Think about those things. This is written by a guy who's in jail. See, my point is that when it comes to solvable versus perpetual problems, solvable problems, we're a problem-solving culture. And so, we have this expectation that every problem should be solved. Well, the ones that are solvable, yeah, let's get it done. Let's solve them. But let's also be wise enough to realize that there are perpetual problems that really aren't solvable because they are problems that emerge out of our differences. For example, the most common example that I can think of is for a married couple or people who are roommates or whatever. Inevitably, what you'll hear stories about people who a neat freak marries someone who's not so neat. It's not a big deal to that person. You think, oh my, but yet people when they get wrapped, you get into negative sentiment or they get stressed out or things are not going well. How important or how big of an issue does that become between those two people? It could be huge. I mean, it can lead people to call each other names, like slob, control freak, all those kinds of things. Why? Because it is a perpetual problem based in the differences between these people. Some of us are just like, we just like things tidied up. Other people are like, hey, it's not that big of a deal, relax. So the relationship's more important than having every little thing in its place. I personally don't agree with that, but no. But that's what drives a lot of conflict is those kinds of differences. And so the answer to those problems is number one, realizing the reality of perpetual problems. And just step one is to tell myself, hey, that there's some problems in relationships that can't be solved. They're rooted in how different we are as people. How many of you, when you first think of somebody that you met and you decided you really liked them as a friend, or you met them as an opposite sex relationship and you fell in love, but anyway, there's a relationship that began and you thought this person is the best, and you got into this relationship thinking, wow, this is the perfect relationship for me, perfect friend for me, perfect spouse for me, or whatever, perfect boyfriend, perfect girlfriend. Have you ever had that feeling early on in a relationship only to find out later on that the other side of the coin is this person has things that drive me nuts? It's the flip side. We oftentimes are attracted to people who are very different from us because we think, oh my gosh, that person completes me, I'm kind of a planned person. I need someone who's more spontaneous in my life. That's so exciting and so fun. That kind of thing can be very attractive in the opening stages of a relationship. What's it like later on? That person is spontaneous. You're like, no, we can't just drop everything and go to the movies. I have a job, So sometimes it's our differences that wind up being those things that begin to drive us crazy later on. The answer, the solution to dealing with perpetual problems is to realize that when a problem with somebody else is bothering us, it can oftentimes be bothering us because there are other things going on in our lives. Like maybe we're stressed out, maybe we're not feeling right, maybe whatever it is. The problem
that we're thinking about, the perpetual problem becomes huge. If you think about your brain or you think about your heart as being a computer screen, it takes up the whole screen, That problem is just huge. You're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? This person has got to change or I'm going to go insane. When you start to think about that, okay, well, what is it about this person that I really, really like? And you start to reframe your thoughts and the discussion. You think, there's so much about this person that I appreciate. There's so much about this person that I wouldn't trade for the world. And it's just like Philippians 4:8. The more I focus on the things about this person that are wonderful and lovely and trustworthy and faithful and all the things that I just love about this person, the more I do that, all of a sudden those perpetual issues begin to shrink. It's like you minimize them on the screen of the relationship. And they just have so much less impact because you've reframed it in terms of what the relationship does bring to you, does provide you. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So that's conflict, that's negative, or that's solvable versus perpetual problems. Second point I want to make today in this particular segment is that relationally wealthy people create for themselves a rich vocabulary resource. What do I mean by that? Okay, so one of the things I found when I was really getting into the Gottman research is that he's got all these vocabulary terms, that I had been unfamiliar with before. And so what I do, here's what I do. When I'm working with a couple in marital therapy, for example, when they come in, I say, I tell them, okay, first thing I'll let you know is I really love this one book, and I'm going to encourage you to go out and buy the book. I'm going to buy actually 2 copies of it because you're each going to underline and circle very different things in this book because you're different people. But what I say is I want you to get the book and I want you to read the first 52 pages. Do not read past page 52. Just read the first 52 pages, and I want you to just make note in your mind of all the different kinds of terminology that you've never heard before. So what I've done for us this morning is I'm making believe you're here for your first session, and here's a list of vocabulary words, and here's why I want people to get familiar with them. One of the things that Terry and I found when we really got into the Gottman literature and so on is that our relationship began to change and become more positive because we became aware of so many things in our relationship and in each of us that we were already doing right, that we began to go, wow, look at all the rich resources that are already in our relationship. And once you start to see all the things that you're doing right, all the things that are working for you, it puts your problems in a whole different perspective. All of a sudden, you're not just focused on the things that aren't working well. It's a Philippians 4:8 experience. You begin to focus and begin to see what else is lovely and trustworthy and beautiful and excellent. So I've got a list. I think there's a list of terms on there, isn't there? So I'm going to just go through these. First term that you come across is called bids for connection. In every relationship, we make bids for connection. We're making them all the time. A bid for connection is just we walk into the room. I made a bid for connection with several of you today. I walked into the lobby of the church and I said, hi. That's a bid for connection. As opposed to me walking in and going, oh, not this guy again. I can't talk to this guy. That's a turning away. A bid for connection is you see somebody and you go, hey, how's it going? And if you're in a marriage, for example, sometimes if you've married an opposite person, you might have married someone who's not a morning person. Anybody? How many morning people are here? Okay. How many people are like definitely not a morning person, Tim? Yeah. Tend to sit toward the back. This is interesting. Okay. People who are not so much morning people, how many times when you get up in the morning and you encounter the other person that you're living with and they make a bid for connection, you're like, coffee first, Anybody? You're a morning person, but you need coffee first. Okay, so you'll make a bid for connection once you get some caffeine in your system. Okay, good. All right, good insight.
Okay, so I have a mixed emotion about this because I am somewhat a morning person. If I've had enough sleep, then I
connection is when I do finally get up, even if I've not went to bed till 2 and then got up at 6, is to start my coffee.
Okay.
He
I probably shouldn't have brought coffee up.
works at the office. He works from home. And
Okay.
that's another thing. We moved from Texas in the middle of COVID, and he works from home. Like, so when COVID happened, he's home all the time, and I got 3 kids. But now that they're in school, so my bid for connection is I know he likes tea, and we both fast until after 10:30. So I took this from another Christian thing, but even how the day ended, it's a new day. I know he likes.
Good.
I'm a coffee person, but he's a tea person. So I'll just not say anything. My bit of connection is just to walk in there and just to. I don't even say anything. I just set the tea down.
Absolutely.
And walk off. Because really, if he does talk to me, I might.
A bid for connection is not necessarily verbal. Yeah, a bid for connection can be handing someone a cup of tea in the morning, you know? I mean, and that's your way of saying good morning. Yeah. A bid for connection is anything you do. It can be body language. It can be something you say. It can be touch. It can be a gesture, whatever it is. Those are bids for connection. We make them throughout the day with people that we meet. Very important to realize this because oftentimes we'll start to have like negative feelings about somebody or have a grudge or somebody just irritates us and we're not aware of the fact that, you know, this person really is a good person. This person is making bids for connection with me all the time. It's also important to realize, you know, maybe if you are, you know, you have a little bit of an attitude towards somebody, but they make a bid for connection. What's that about? What's going on there? Well, maybe it's like it's a bid to maybe reconnect. And I have a question. I mean, I have to answer this question myself. Am I going to reject this or am I going to accept this? Bids for connection, very valuable. So be aware. Again, this is an awareness thing. Be mindful in your relationship about the bids for connection. A lot of you will drive away from here today if you came with somebody thinking, okay, yeah, you know what? What are our bids for connection? You'll talk about them. And then now you'll start to realize them for the value that they have, okay? It's not just data. These are valuable things. Number 2, flooding. Who knows what flooding is? Okay, tell me. Yes, emotions overtake your ability to reason. You know, what I always think about, the visual that I get, I remember when Terry and I were living in Southern California, I was in graduate school, we were dirt poor. So on the weekends, what we would do for fun is we'd, you know, spend like $1.50 on gas and drive out to the beach. And we'd spend the day out there at the beach and body surf and hang out and so on and so forth. But I remember a couple times, I'm not a great body surfer, so I remember a couple times getting caught by a rogue kind of wave thing. And I'm like, I remember thinking to myself, I wonder if I'm going to die right now. Because I didn't know what way was up. I didn't know. Sometimes you can get into conflict with somebody or get emotionally into a place in life where you feel like you have been dragged underwater and you don't know which way is up. That's being flooded. And emotional flooding is something that really can become a problem in relationships if you don't recognize it for what it is. It's just, sometimes we think, okay, you refuse to discuss this with me. No, I'm flooded. People don't realize flooding is a real thing. Whenever your heart rate gets over 100 beats a minute, you're flooded. You can't hear, you can't reason, you can't argue your way out of a paper bag. It's really important if one or both people in a relationship become flooded, it's going to take you 20 or 30 minutes to reset. It's just the way we're engineered, folks. And it's not that you're weak because that's happening to you. Emotional flooding is a thing. And it's really important to realize it. And it's very emotionally intelligent of you if you're in a relationship and you can recognize, you start to get into a discussion with somebody, with your friend or your spouse or your partner or whatever, and there's this flooding that's taking place in the other person. The smartest thing to do is to say, hey, you know what? Maybe we need to take a break. That's the most loving thing you can do in that moment, is take a break. Okay? Respect the fact that flooding's happening. Yeah, go ahead, Michelle. Right. Yeah. Various things that cause, sometimes there can just be a trigger. You know, somebody says something to you or makes a gesture that maybe takes you back to your childhood, and that just, you know, you've got a little PTSD about that. All of a sudden, emotionally, you're just like covered up. But yeah, I'm going to talk about that escalating in just a moment. Third thing, soothing and self-soothing. Soothing is what you do when you start to get flooded and you need to calm down. Soothing is what you say to yourself or what you do. Maybe you go outside. Maybe you take a walk. Maybe you whatever it is, close your eyes. Maybe you sing. Maybe whatever. Maybe you pray. Maybe you read a verse. But soothing is whatever tool you have in your emotional toolbox to begin to reset yourself. That's self-soothing. Soothing is when you help another person do that, and you realize you're having a discussion, that other person's getting flooded, and you go, hey, you know what? I'm sorry. Let's just dial it back a little bit. I realized I raised my voice, or I realized, and it's helping the other person kind of come back to a set point. That's soothing. Repair system. Very important. There's so many people. I'll have folks that'll come in the office and they're having a lot of problems with how they process their issues, and they don't even have a repair system. They don't have a way for getting back. And I'll oftentimes ask them. I'll say, what was it like growing up in your home? How did people deal with conflict? How did your parents deal? A lot of people say, I never saw my parents fight. I have no clue. They've got no roadmap for how to deal with conflict. There's no repair system because they never saw their parents argue. And so what that is what the repair system is that realizing that conflict has a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's a life cycle to a conflict. There's you start to get your feelings hurt, and then maybe you talk about how your feelings are hurt, and then maybe somebody might then say, hey, I'm sorry I hurt your feelings. There's an apology. Will you forgive me? There's forgiveness. There's a whole life cycle to a conflict. A lot of folks don't realize that, and so they don't have a system for repairing when they break down. And it's once you realize, I remember Terry and I remember when I read this stuff and we're talking about it, thinking, my gosh, we were lucky enough that we both have the ability to go, hey, you know what? I realized what I just said hurt your feelings. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean for that to happen. And we can have this discussion, and the conflict has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we can reset, and we have the power to forgive each other and move on. If you have that system where you can both make repair attempts with the other person and you can receive them when they're coming from the other person, you are head and shoulders above a lot of conflicted people. So that's a repair system. Any questions about that? Yeah, Terry.
Do you think the fact that you didn't see your parents fight slowed that process down or changed your process?
I saw my parents fight, so yeah. No, I talked to a lot of people for whom that happens. Yes, it does. It slows. They don't know how to deal with it. It's like there's no roadmap in people's relationships because they never saw successful conflict get resolved.
My son did not see us fight. We discussed things at bedtime and stuff, and we didn't. My parents fought, and occasionally would get physical. It would be insulting, and then I remember an incident where my mom took her high heel off and whacked.
Yeah, so we're talking about conflict that you do grow up seeing, but yeah, just because you see conflict doesn't mean you've seen a repair system. Okay, repair system is where you realize that yeah, boy, my parents really got into it last night, but you know what? My dad apologized or my mom apologized, and there was closure. And wow, there's people get upset, but then people work stuff out.
Well, and they did, but I took on a different role
Yes,
as a parent then.
right.
And I've taught, my son has commented to me, I just want to make sure that he knew that it's okay to do it the other way
Right.
too. That this is what worked for us because I didn't want to go down.
It's important for children to realize that conflict is a normal part of a relationship. Yeah. Yes.
I think, well, I didn't have a mother-father relationship. My mom was raised in an orphanage, and then my mom was a single mother of 4. But going into relationships, there has been a time where I've been estranged from my mom because when I became an adult and I started receiving counseling because I realized I needed it, that I've had to set boundaries with my family. And they're like, you need to forgive your mom, she's your mom. No. Because I know my mom was hurt in her childhood,
Right.
but she can't bleed all over me. And it's not that I don't love my mom, and Mother's Day is coming, but I've had to set boundaries. And there was a time where, there's a scripture where, God will return what has been taken away. But now she has Alzheimer's, and she doesn't remember a lot of things. And I think it's because her mental illness and stuff that it actually progressed a lot faster. Because
Right.
my cousin's, she's a twin, my cousin's caretaking for her, so I have to work through a lot of things. And before we left Texas, she wasn't welcome in our home because it was pretty bad. I had to protect my family, but we would see her outside of our home. And then we were selling our house, and I had all my family come in, but there's still like a healing process over there.
Yes.
But I had to explain to my cousin, she's like, why don't you just forgive her? I'm like, I have to heal first. I can't forgive someone if I'm not healing and setting a boundary, because they're going to continue that behavior.
Sometimes you need to set boundaries in relationships in order to get to a place where you can heal and where you can then forgive.
Yeah, but I think it's because my kids were like, Mom, why aren't you talking to Nana? And I'm like, well, it's a healing process that I have to go through, and I'm not keeping them, but she was able to see them, but outside our home,
Right.
because it was almost like an attack on my family. And
Good for
it was
you.
right after my sister passed, and I think she was just going through, it was her own baggage, and then I had to realize she had to heal that, but I had to set a protection point for me. And so when you go back and you see that now, especially since her health's not, she didn't even remember we moved.
Yeah.
When we went to visit. And so I have to let go of that. I have to do a letter write-off, and that's with God, but know that there's still healing going, because I don't want to see her pass, but it's like
Yeah.
a process of,
That kind of healing is a process, and kudos for you folks who have realized, you grew up in maybe a dysfunctional or less than functional home, or you had a parent that had some pretty severe issues. We can let that, we can continue to be traumatized by those memories, and it's a serious thing. You don't just get over it. But one of the steps in making progress is realizing that people, I saw a bumper sticker years ago, and it sounds trite to some people, but there's so much truth in it. It's that hurt people hurt people. Hurt people hurt people. And it's when you get that, when you understand that, it's easy. It becomes a little bit easier to deal with the hurt you've experienced from someone when you realize that in order for them to have hurt me as badly as they did, what must have gone on for them? That kind of question, that kind of empathy is super important in your own healing. Okay. All right, let's go. Moving on. Repair system. We talked about that. Okay, 4 types of negativity. These are what Gottman calls the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. In every person's personality, you have what I would call a default reaction when you're in conflict. And Gottman has identified these 4 things as criticism, complaining, defensiveness, and stonewalling. All right, or criticism and contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. So criticism, everybody knows what criticism is, right? Anybody think, okay, this is my go-to thing. When we get into conflict, I tend to become critical. Anybody want to own up to that? Okay, 1 person. Good for you. Yeah, there's some of us who, when things get kind of tense, we tend to become kind of critical of other people. Another reaction is contempt or complaining. Contempt is what Gottman describes as a long simmering disgust. This is after a long period of time's gone on. You've been hurt, and you've been a lot of negativity in the relationship, and you're in way in deep into negative sentiment. So criticism and contempt. The 3rd one is defensiveness. This is my deal. When we get into conflict, my default is defensiveness. It's not me, it's you. And that is the thing that really can interrupt our progress in dealing with the disagreement, is my defensiveness. And then the 4th one is stonewalling. I had a guy in my office the other day who was like, "Yep, Tim, that's me." He's a classic stonewaller. So that when he grew up in a home where he never saw conflict worked out. And so he became very conflict avoidant himself. And so when he's in a relationship, his wife brings something up and they start to have a conversation. He's like, "I'm out." Emotionally, he just shuts down. And this just infuriates her. So she gets more critical of him. And then they've got this nice little cycle going. So that's why they have to go to therapy, see? Because she's critical, he is defensive. She's critical, he's defensive. And they just chase each other around this cycle. So the reason I lay those 4 things out is not so much so you could say, yeah, that's my partner, that's my spouse, that's my friend. Not so you can identify it in somebody else. But what I always ask folks when they first come in for therapy and we start to talk about their conflict is I oftentimes ask them, can you identify, you've read the first 56 pages, 52 pages of the Gottman book. Remember the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse? Which of those forms of negativity do you gravitate to when things get? That slows people down. There could be like 2 or 3 solid minutes of silence in my office at that point because people don't think about what they bring to the table. One of the most valuable things you can do is to figure out what is your default, mode for negativity. And the next time you get into conflict, when things are starting to brew and you're starting, okay, here we go again. We're having that perpetual, problem discussion about fill in the blank, whether it's money or time or whatever it is. And you stop and you tell yourself, okay, don't be defensive. Those 3 words can stop you from just telling yourself, don't be defensive. You can have a much more productive conversation. In our earlier years of marriage, Terry would bring up a subject, something that, we were kind of having conflict about. And I just remember, now that I can reflect on it, I can remember these just feelings of defensiveness coming up in me. And just deciding I'm not super defensive. Now, I'm a little more able to say, okay, to myself, don't be defensive. And I remember we had a conversation about something not that long ago, and I said, and she, complained about something, and I said, I could understand how you'd feel that way. I did do that. She wasn't totally shocked. But you could see how it reset the whole discussion. Because there was no need now for her to go, well, let me give you a list of how you, she didn't have to do that. I said, I can totally understand how you feel that way. I just had the presence of mind in that moment to just not push back on it. And guess what? We had a breakthrough in whatever the conversation, I don't even remember what the issue was at this point. It was nothing, as important as how we do these discussions. And it made a huge difference in the outcome and the rest of the day. Make sense? So figure out what yours is. Sorry and forgive me goes, yeah, it does. It does. Yep. Okay, escalating harshness, like we were talking about earlier. Escalating, one of the things that Gottman realized, when you read his book, he says a couple of things at the beginning of the book that some people find kind of arrogant or, prideful, in that he says that he can predict with 96% accuracy whether a couple will divorce based on watching them for 15 minutes in an argument. And people are like, that guy, he's pretty full of himself. I gotta tell you, all these years later, I think I could predict it too. Because there's one major predictor for relationships that are not gonna make it long term. It's how they control their harshness. Proverbs 15:1 talks about harshness. Basically, the message is harshness never helps. And if you tend toward harshness, think about this for a minute. Have you ever gotten, irritated with someone and then escalated and become harsh with them and they went, you're right? Anybody ever do that? No. Harshness only creates more harshness. There's harshness. I've never seen, of course, I've only been doing this for 36 years, but I've never seen any argument between 2 people result in a major breakthrough because the harshness worked. It doesn't work. If you tend to become harsh when you're having negative conversations, you've got to deal with that and dial that back. It will not help. And the Proverbs talks about this over and over and over again. Okay, positive sentiment, negative. Okay, some of these we talked about last night. I don't need to go over and over them, but you know what positive sentiment is? That's the sentiment level. If you weren't here last night, that's the pervasive feelings of positivity that you have in your relationship. And I think it's always important to ask yourself, is our relationship basically in positive sentiment today or negative sentiment? Are we moving toward more positive or more negative sentiment? Once you get into negative sentiment, again, it's a long journey sometimes to turn that around. It's like you're, I totally tell the story about this guy they were in totally negative sentiment. And I have this picture in my mind of this canister full of mud, and this guy decides, we're going to change this relationship. I want to make this marriage better. And so he brings her flowers. And what I describe that as, that is a full thimbleful of clear water poured into mud. It does not clear it all up. I mean, it's a long haul sometimes to move from negative sentiment to positive sentiment. And so that's why it's so important for you to really focus on continuing to build positive sentiment in your relationship. And if you're in negative sentiment, to begin to work toward those things we talked about last night, okay? Love maps and so on. Negative sentiment, okay. Rituals of connection. Remember we talked about that last night. These are the things that you do on an ongoing basis. Ask yourself, okay, in your relationship on an ongoing basis, what are the rituals? What are the things we do like every week, or we do every morning, or we do like every month? What are those things that we do? They're the rituals. They're woven into the fabric of our relationship. And when we do those things, we just have a great time together. What are those things? And they're so important to continue to build positive sentiment. Rituals of connection. Don't just see them as things you've fallen into the habit of doing. See them for the value that they have in your relationship. Okay. Okay, these last two I added on my own because I just anecdotally have seen the value of them. One is called explanatory effect. I know that's a kind of a weird term, but explanatory effect is me realizing how the sentiment we're in our relationship filters our view of the other person. For example, if you're in positive sentiment and you're waiting for your friend or your partner or your spouse to get somewhere and they show up late, if you're in positive sentiment, you'll probably go, I wonder, must have been traffic or something. I mean, are you okay? What's going on? And you'd ask a question because you expect the best out of the other person. You're not looking for the worst. If you're explanatory effect, if you're in negative sentiment, you're more tempted to have, tend to have kind of what I'll call a negative filter on the front of your relationship. And so that person can walk in and go, hey, how you doing today? And you'll be like, what do you mean by that? So we have the power to filter even positive comments as negative if we're in negative sentiment. So what's your explanatory effect in your relationship? Do you just expect the best of and for the person you're in a relationship with? Or are you suspicious and more negative effect? All right, last one, processing versus looping. Okay, this is kind of a new thing for me because I've got a person in my family who's not here today. I say that because I don't want anybody to feel indicted, who will periodically, talk to Terry or me about other people in the family that they are not happy with. You ever had anybody in your family that does that? They're like, and so you find yourself in this kind of negative conversation about somebody, and this guy will go on and on. Okay, I've already identified that it's a male. But anyway, but this person will go on and on about how, I can't believe so-and-so. They're just always like blah, 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 and kind of just doing this negative shtick all the time. And, but I know this person loves this other person. They're just really frustrated by this, really bugged by this. I would even say grudge level feelings toward this other person. But it never stops. And, I told Terry the other day, I was like, I can't listen to this anymore. It's like the same thing over and over again. And I think Terry might have said something to this person. And the person said, well, I have to do this because I've got to process how I feel about this other person. This is driving me nuts. I got to process it. This is a male who's an external processor. And it occurred to me, he's not processing. Processing takes you to a new place. Processing helps you work through something. And so ask yourself, if you're doing that habitually in your relationship, are you processing or looping? See, looping is just, I keep doing the same thing. I never get anywhere with it. This has become my new ritual in the relationship that I have with you is we talk about so-and-so. I blow off steam. I feel better because I talk about this other person in real negative terms. That's looping. That is not good for us. Looping is not good for us. Processing can be good. People who come in and talk to me all the time, they want to process what happened to them. And I notice the processing for them is working if on a regular basis they come back in and go, hey, I'm feeling a little bit better about this. I was able to hang out with this person, use some good boundaries, and things are working. As opposed to people that just get stuck looping. Okay? Any comments or questions about that? It's kind of a new term that I'm throwing out. Yes? Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, maybe I came up with this term because of COVID. And the politics around what's going on in America, the election, blah blah. I mean, there are people who just can't quit looping, whatever side of the political aisle you're on. Yeah, it's like we don't get anywhere with it. How do you control that? Well, one of the ways that you can control it if it's happening with somebody is, first of all, recognize, okay, we've left the whole processing thing. We're not processing anymore. Now we're looping. And you got to maybe put some boundaries in place and say, hey, you can't talk about this today. I'm like, this is not good. Or maybe even if you think the relationship could withstand it, you might even mention to the person the difference between processing and looping. It's risky, because some people can't deal with that kind of reality. Yes. Yes, that's what, I was just mentioning. Boundaries, where you can just say, okay, hey, let's not talk about that person today, okay? I'm having a good day. I'd kind of like to stay in, where I am. That's a boundary. Just saying, hey, it's finding a way to use boundaries to prevent the looping from, driving you absolutely insane. Yeah. Okay. Anything else about looping? Had enough of looping? That's a joke. Okay. All right. 5 science. Okay, we're running low on time, aren't we, George? Are we good? Okay. All right. I'm going to finish these 5 science-based steps for fighting in a relationship worth fighting for. And then we're going to take a break and maybe we'll practice fighting out in the lobby. Okay. So there's 5 steps. Soften your startup. Learn to make and receive repair attempts. We're kind of putting together what we've been talking about here. Number 3, soothe yourself and each other. Number 4, compromise. Number 5, address emotional injury. So let's take these one at a time. First of all, soften your startup. Now, for those of you who tend to be like harsh startup people, you know who you are, do you? People who tend to be harsh startup people. Oftentimes, those of us who are type A, or just angry, we can tend to be harsh startup people. And really important to recognize that. I mean, you may recognize it in somebody else more readily than you recognize in yourself, but think about it. Do I tend to start off, negative conversations and go, right to, turn the dial up to 11? Is that the way I deal with conflict? And so, number 1, I want to avoid the 4 horsemen. That's the first thing I want to do if I'm softening my startup. Okay, ask myself, what is it that I contribute to the harsh startup? Is it defensiveness? Is it stonewalling? Is it criticism? Is it contempt? So I got to really work on my vocabulary. What am I going to say? Secondly, take responsibility. Okay, you know what? I'm a defensive person at times. The negative Tim can be very defensive. Number 3, learn how to complain, not blame. So, a lot of people, think that there's no difference between complaining and criticizing. There's a huge difference. Criticism says, you're a slob. Complaining is, hey, it really bothers me when your socks are on the floor all the time. Can we do something? Can we work this out? That's a complaint. Yeah. One is an accusation. I'm kind of labeling your character. People who leave their socks out are just disgusting human beings. As opposed to, this is a complaint I have. This is my deal. It bugs me. I just don't like socks on the floor. And so that's a complaint. Just an easier way to talk about it. It's not a surefire remedy, but no, I'm not speaking personally here or anything. But all right. So complain, don't blame. 4th, start with I instead of you. Okay, I have a problem with such and such. or this bothers me, rather than you need to, or, you are always and never. Number whatever, number 5, be polite. I gotta say, I think, man, just the way our cultures become so uncivil to people, to each other. I see it in, intimate relationships. I see it in friendships. I see it in public, in the public. We're just not nice. We're not gentle and kind with each other. So ask yourself, am I a gentle, kind person? Can I bring stuff up without being, rude? So be polite. Say what you do appreciate in the other person. So before you start to address something, go, okay, I really want to talk about this problem, this perpetual issue that we're having, but what is it that I still really like about this person? What do I really appreciate about them? Sometimes if you can start with that and affirm that, it makes it a lot easier to talk about other stuff that is less than. Yeah, Michelle. Terry, can you give us an example? Yeah.
I know you're a hard worker, but.
Okay, but let's leave but out of it. But yes, I like the start. You're a very hard worker. Yeah, something you appreciate about the other person. Yeah. I will give an example. I think Terry's been really good about this. It's been hard for me to work less. I'm going to just admit it. I'm used to working a lot. I'm not a martyr. I like what I do, and one of the decisions we've made is to spend more time together. We're doing some more traveling and so on and so forth. And the other day, I booked more people into my practice, into my appointment, than we'd already decided we weren't going to do this much. And Terry was like, hey, I know you really like what you do. I appreciate, the income, and I appreciate, she said, but we had an agreement about how many patients you were going to see. I mean, I was trapped at that point. I'm like, what do I do? I just had to say, you're right. We did. I won't do it next time. Yeah.
Well, use the word but.
Yeah.
That can be dangerous.
It sure can.
I mean, you're a great person, but you're also
Yeah.
a jerk.
Right. Yeah. Use the word and. Yeah. Or just don't qualify it. Just say, I love this about you. Is it possible that we could? I mean, just to be, just don't. Whenever you use the word "but," you're sort of canceling out the other thing. You're a great person, but not really. Okay. Where was I? Yeah. Oh, and then lastly, so say what you do appreciate about them, and then lastly, on soften your startup. These are just like tips for how to soften your startup. Don't let stuff build up. I mean, people do that. They just wait for 10 months to deal with something, and then it all comes out, and the person's like, how long have you been keeping this, below the surface? So don't let stuff build up. Number 2, learn how to make and receive repair attempts. I think we've talked about this pretty thoroughly, but just a couple things. This might feel weird if you grew up not seeing people make repair attempts. So you might have to develop your own vocabulary. I always talk to a lot of people about who don't have history watching people apologize and make up. You're like, I don't know what to say. I want to have a repair, thing in our relationship, but I don't know. I never heard anybody apologize. So you might have to actually write a script for yourself, hey, I want to just say, I'm sorry. I know what I said hurts your feelings. So, I'm making a repair attempt. We've even used the term with each other. We've had an argument about something. One of us will come in the room and go, hey, I'm going to make a repair attempt now. And then, but the other person's got this choice of accepting it or rejecting it. And, hopefully, so you were here, you're going to start receiving them. Remember, there's always 2 parts to a repair attempt, making them and receiving them. You might make one, but another person might make one too. Are you willing to receive it? Some people, you've probably done this before. You've made repair attempts with people and they just weren't ready, or they're too angry. So at some point, you got to ask yourself, okay, this person has approached me to get forgiveness a number of times. When am I going to finally go, all right, I receive that repair attempt. I forgive you. I'm good. So it's receiving it too. Then soothe yourself and each other. Remember, flooding happens. when your heart rate gets over 100 beats a minute, a lot of things happen physiologically. You're not yourself, and so there's a possibility that you can't even discuss something because you really can't even hear what the other person's saying. You're so upset, you're so flooded, and so you need to take a break. And I'm serious when I say this. This is just a scientific fact. If your heart rate is over 100 beats a minute, you really need 20 to 30 minutes of not talking about it. A lot of people have a hard time with that because they're like, no, we need to deal with this. I want to go to bed. Okay, maybe you need to go to bed and talk about it in the morning because you need 20 to 30 minutes to deal with this. All right, compromise always works best when both people are willing to compromise, willing to show some acceptance. Because this is, again, compromise is me saying I'm willing to accept influence from you. That's one of the hallmarks of highly successful, highly satisfied relationships is accepting influence. Super important. We could do a whole segment on accepting influence. Lastly, address emotional injuries. One person in the relationship may have a deep wound, and that's not the thing you argued about so much as, and it's not the thing you argue about as much as the tone or the intensity of it. Anybody ever said to you, hey, it's not so much what you said, it's how you said it? So you just think about that, how you come across. Most of us aren't really that clear about how we come across. And I always go back to years and years ago. Remember when video cameras first came out, people were buying them, but they were huge. Like the dad and the family had to hold the camera because it was so heavy. Our church had one, and I borrowed it because I wanted to record our kids. They were walking around doing all this cute stuff. And I just remember I was videotaping our son. And our daughter, who was 2 years older, was getting in the way of something cute he was doing. And I saw the playback later of the way I was talking to Tracy about her getting in the way of the cuteness of her brother. And I just oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that. If we see yourself on video sometimes, I'll never forget that. And that's been probably 37 years ago that happened. So just if you can take a video of yourself in your brain, it can be very helpful. Okay, let's take a break. Yeah, George?
So let me make